And, I love it because, I always thought that this tagline, trust Black women was just like a thing. But then what I began to realize is like, no, 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 this is a whole movement. It's a whole organization. It's a whole activity. And I don't even know what it is, but tonight we're all going to learn together. So what I wanted to get started is with introductions. So if you can start, Dr. Williams, letting us know who you are, your background, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're excited to be here. And then next we're gonna go with Dr. Ashley.
Hey everyone. So I consider myself a collective care practitioner. My background is in social work, and I'm also a clinical therapist that focuses on perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, primarily amongst Black women. I also have the honor of serving as a Kentucky coordinator for the national organization called Sister Song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. So I'm really excited to be here with you all in community.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you. And Dr. Ashley, tell us a little bit about you, your research, what you do.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. I'm Ashley Fritz Allen, and I am the current Mellon postdoc in sociology at Grinnell College in Iowa. I also served as the Boys Mandela Rodney postdoc at the University of Michigan. I held a PhD in sociology from the University of Georgia. I'm specializing in Black ethnic identity, social movements, and social media. I also have a degree in creative writing from Emory University. And so I'm really excited to be here. My book just came out earlier this last week. And so I'm really excited to have it out during Latinx Heritage Month and to be here with you all during that time as well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, thank you. And next time you speak, we definitely want to hear more about your book. And I didn't realize, I think you told me that was getting ready to drop. I'm so excited. I would order one, but it just came out last week. Yes, yes, yes. The hot glue gun. We want to talk about that. But first, let's go to Dr. Williams. Tell us this. Tell us how you got started in your work in advocacy and activism within the Black community. What motivated you to focus on this work?
I started off, in a clinical setting, and what I was noticing was the individuals that I was working with or just that was coming through the clinic, they got treated differently in the care that they were offered. I was working at a substance use facility, and so the advocacy started then, just being tired, but then also mindful of the care that they deserved. And that was about 8 years ago. I would say since then, organically, it's been moving into spaces where I can advocate for Black women when it comes to Black maternal health. So I do a lot of work around that. And so for those you all may not know, just the disparities against Black women being pregnant in the postpartum stage. So holding them on an individual level, but then being able to go into rooms and talk about the care that they deserve at these hospitals, the care that they deserve at the state and national legislative space as well. It's interesting, but I would also say I'm noticing things shift and a lot of people really talking about this issue currently as well.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Ashley, for you, I found it unique that you were focusing not only on activism, but social media and the Afro-Latinx community. Tell us a little bit about that and why you decided to focus on that background, that focus, that area.
Of course. So my research has deeply personal ties. My parents are from Siqueiros Limon in Costa Rica, but I was born and raised in Irvington, New Jersey. My predominantly Black and deeply diasporic town gave me firsthand insight into the complexities of Black ethnic identity. I always knew I was Costa Rican, but I didn't really attempt to figure out what that meant. It just was. Black and Costa Rican simultaneously made sense. It was most familiar to me because I was familiar with the Black Costa Ricans that made up my family. I never really experienced ethno-racial dissonance myself, or rather a disconnect between my ethnic and racial identity, because I knew from my family that Black and Costa Ricans can coexist. But I realized that's not quite the same for other Afro-Latinxes. I would visit Costa Rica in the summers, and though I never picked up Spanish, I felt deeply personal ties to that place. But while in Irvington, New Jersey, I cultivated a friend group, unintentionally, of other first-gen Afro-Caribbeans. The connections between our Caribbean culture made evident to me the diaspora before I even had the words. The organic development of a Caribbean feminist consciousness grew out of listening to my friends, to our mothers, teaching around the table out on Saturday morning brunch with ackee and saltfish, breadfruit, fried dumplings. And so my mother would tell me, you can be from the hood without being of the hood. And that's not to discredit my mother's local civic engagement. She still works the polls for elections. She participates in her local chapter of People's Action Network. She was even in the PTA. But I especially remember every year for Latinx Heritage Month, she would bring items to be displayed at the Irvington Library. And once she even emceed an event there. Actually, speaking of my mother, do you mind if I share a quick poem from my book here?
Yeah, please do.
So here's my book, The Hot Glue Gun Chronicles, a guide to putting the pieces together. I'm going to be reading a poem called Questions for My Immigrant Mother. Mom, is this the American dream you came here for? Is this what you boarded a plane dressed in your Sunday's best for? What Dad drove a cab in Coney Island for, left my sister behind for? Mom, how did you come here for a better life, to a place that doesn't even want us to live? I never understood how a person could be illegal, but I think we're some of those illegal immigrants that people consistently complain about. Did you know it was illegal to be Black here? They kill people that look like us here. Mom, why would you bring me to a place like this? Some sort of twisted post-birth abortion clinic? I don't think Sana will work on bullet wounds. Bush tea won't hide my melanin from them. No matter how much leaf of life we bring over, I fear I will die here, and my body will be food for the same trees they use to lynch Black bodies, bodies that look like mine. My navel cord is buried under a mango tree in my grandmother's yard, and that land is calling out for me, calling me back to safety. I can feel it in my belly bottom. See, I know the American flag is the same colors as ours, but this flag here feels like police lights in my rearview mirror. And this American dream is for people who look like us to never see the light of day. So can we leave now? Mom, if I promise to learn Spanish and scrub the floors and take my cod liver oil every day, can we go home, Mom? Can we please go home? Thank you.
Wow, wow. Thank you for sharing that.
So
That's excited. In your book, is it a book of poetry? Is it a book of
yes.
reflection? Is it a
It's
memory? Tell us
a book
about it.
of poems. It's a book of poems that really experience a lot of both family as well as themes of home, as well as social justice themes related to Black Lives Matter, Black mental health. And so there's a lot of different themes that really connect through the book. And I think they're really important as a Afro-Latinx queer voice in the community to be able to share these stories that really dedicate this book to really the foremothers that came before me and how their influence of my Black feminist lens that I continue to carry with me throughout life and work.
Awesome, awesome. If you don't mind, drop it in the chat where we can purchase your book. And I know Jay is going to love it because Jay loves poetry. So she's going to have questions for you next. Before that, Dr. Williams, tell us a little bit about this. We just talked a little bit about the Afro-Latinx, identity. You actually are focusing on building trust. Can you tell us what that means in the context of activism, especially when it comes to Black women? What is trusting Black women all about?
So I recently was having this conversation with some folks of we have to trust ourselves first. And so when I sit down with Black women on an individual level, but then also in groups, we were learning that what messages did we receive when it came to trusting ourselves and the ideas that we have. When it's time to launch that business, when it's time to follow through with what our gut is telling us. And what we were talking about was oftentimes navigating systems. You would come across adversity, or you would come across where you were silenced, where Black women have silenced their voice and being able to trust to speak up when it's injustices that they are fighting against. Trusting within the community and how you build that, it starts as an individual level too. So trusting self, so then I can navigate throughout community and feel trust amongst my peers, especially amongst Black women. Once we can do that and have accountability in ourselves and how we trust one another, then we can think about this dyadic relationships with other Black women, relationships within the community as well. But it takes you showing up. And sometimes it's not always about what you're sharing and talking, but are you listening? Are you hearing what Black women are saying? Are you taking the time to follow through with your promises and what you said that you was going to deliver? Are you supporting Black women too? And I'm not just talking monetary, I'm talking about pushing their initiatives, letting them take lead. So when you say trust Black women, it's trusting Black women to lead. It's trusting them to have autonomy over their body. It's trusting them to have choice if they have children and not have children. It's a lot, but it starts within community, and we spread it out within our families and within systems too.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. If you don't mind dropping in the chat where we can follow or understand and learn more about the Trusting Black Women initiatives, that'd be great. Because what I want to do is next ask you about some of the key challenges that not only the organization, but Black women are facing. One of the things, Doctor, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so I work in the movement of reproductive justice. This year marks 30 years of reproductive justice. And for many, they don't realize that 12 Black women coined that phrase. And some of them are still living. So like Loretta Ross, Dr. Tony Bonds, those are the shoulders that we stand upon. So they were discussing the injustices when it comes to not only reproductive health, but our sexual wellness and well-being. We are still fighting that same fight. And so when you think about Roe versus Wade, when it fell, when you think about these banned states that is not giving people access to bodily autonomy and the choice to have a child or not have a child, we are continuing to see the same ripple effect because we did not get it right years ago. So now we're still fighting against that. And what we've also seen in Georgia recently, 2 Black women, as the data is coming out, actually died as they were trying to seek care, going to other states to get abortion access. And so we have to do better when it comes to our healthcare system and actually advocating for what we deserve when it comes to our care.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And please share, information where we can follow the organization and learn more about it. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Cooks Allen, and I'm trying to get names right because, I get a chance to practice my name. So now I'm going to do last names because of the shift. On your movement, I've been really, really excited about this Afro-Latinx thing. Because growing up in Texas, and then having lived in North Carolina, I was reading this one book, and I forget the author, but she was talking about the Hispanic population and the Black population in certain historical conflicts, things that, not historical conflict, but, this perception that we don't like each other, we don't get along, things like that. And you kind of alluded to nuances of that. And in her research, she begins to find these nuances of where the communities have a lot in common. And I really appreciate that. With going back to your question, you've done research on social media, and not only social media, but identity. I was talking to a friend and they talked about what they call digital babies, people who are spending more time with digital systems or social media than, historical parenting. And it says social media definitely has an influence. How do you believe social media influence the ways that individual, especially people of color, marginalized communities, navigate their own identity?
So it's definitely, we see more and more that identity is really at play when we're looking at social media. In one aspect, because of their participation in activism, is really in alignment with how we understand identity as well. And so for social media, Afro-Latinxers are able to actually use social media as a platform to try to reassert themselves in and we kind of claim that identity by using connecting to other Afro-Latinxes, by using hashtags to define themselves and to get their work, their content, as well as their activism spread out. And so it's really important to look at the ways that people are actually using social media to do this. So like I spoke to Afro-Latinx social media users about their social media, and one participant, even she had been raised in the foster system. She had got her identity invalidated time and time again. She stopped identifying as Panamanian. And then in her adult years, she got into social media, found more community, and saw other people embracing that identity. And so she's finally said, so there is a space for us to speak. And it's so important for us to have these spaces where people are able to speak and we're also taking the time to listen. And so being able to create those spaces where our identities can be affirmed is really essential. And that's why it's really helpful that social media allows us to do that.
Thanks for sharing that. I remember when natural hair first became a thing. This was kind of when social media was just getting started. And I was watching this documentary and it was talking about how the natural hair movement in America, the part where we began to get proud about our hair and to wear it more naturally as it's grown, is that before social media, there was these various websites you would go to get, how do you do this? How do you do certain things? But then social media opened the door where we're like one hashtag away or one follow away from people who look like us, feel like us, and essentially we're going through the same challenges as us. So it's kind of cool because when you mention it, I hadn't really thought about, wait a minute, people who have their identity stripped from them or shamed from them, they can also be one hashtag away from getting positive message and affirmations that work for them. Thank you for sharing that. I want to go back to Dr. Williams. Dr. Williams, thank you for sharing in the chat how we can support, Trusting Black Women platform and organization. Can you let us know about some of the challenges, right? I mean, I always like to talk about the messy middle, not just the good part. What are some of the challenges and your recommendations for strategies on building trust within communities? For example, is there such thing as an ally? Is there allyship challenges? Is there things where it's like, no, this is a FUBU initiative. What are some of your strategies in reference to the challenges you see on trusting Black women?
So because we're talking about marginalized groups who have experienced, historical trauma and who have a history where we've been exploited and other things of that nature, I like community. Well, I love community because I feel like that's where you can get healing from too. And that's where you can get collective care. And so what I share with people is it's our responsibility to take care of one another. And so that means when it comes to mutual aid funding of someone, housing assistance, or just being able to get through day to day from your job. When we are in community, it's not about, your accolades and you're coming there with your credentials. It's really just showing up and centering community and what is the need that's going to benefit all of us, not just one of us. And so it's collective, and getting people to relearn that as well when they're in community, that when I am able to contribute to community, it's going to be for the betterment of all of us. So when you think about the school systems in our neighborhoods, the churches in our neighborhoods, when you think about political power, building people up in community is a strategy that we can do. And so talking about, are we going to do a campaign? Talking about, is there something we're going to do in regards to social media? We see that happen on TikTok and Instagram all the time, where we're seeing these influencers, everyday people having messages on social media to draw people in to have a better understanding of the social injustices that we're up against. Community is virtual. Community is also right here in your home, like right now, a sharing space as well.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I often like to talk about the messy middle, and I was chatting with a friend once, and they were like, why does that even matter? Why must you have a struggle? Why is the struggle so important? And I still struggle with the answer, but in my bones, I'm like, the struggle is so important to when we get there. So thank you for helping us understand how community is important. And as you were talking, I just kind of had this connection, right? To, trusting Black women and these Afro-Latinx voices, right? Because, there's a struggle and there's this messy middle. And I'm just thinking about what community looks like. Dr. Cooks Allen, I'm also thinking about you, right? When it comes to the struggle. Tell us about the messy middle. Some of the perspectives that the Afro-Latinx activists may, provide, or contribute to this journey of social justice. In addition, you mentioned kind of about, hidden narratives or voices that hadn't been stated. Let us know about what you feel that the Afro-Latinx community brings to this discussion about social justice, and how does that impact or support some of the hidden narratives?
Definitely. So definitely, I was going to first start by saying that community is really important. Even in my book, I have a line in the foreword that says, our best chance of survival is in community. And I think that's really important for Afro-Latinx social media users as well. One of the major challenges Afro-Latinx activists face is erasure. So even within broader Latinx or Black social movements, Afro-Latinx voices often get overlooked or sidelines. There's a feeling that we need to constantly assert our presence and remind people that Afro-Latinx individuals have unique perspectives and contributions to make. For example, one participant said, so it was really for me, more of a battle to explain to people and make them aware that the Latino you see on TV is not only Latino that exists. Another challenge that exists is the anti-Blackness within Latinx communities. Activists often have to navigate and call out bias while simultaneously fighting against broader systemic racism. In their calls to action, we see that a lot of, there's a lot in common with Black and Latino groups, as we see calls for solidarity in that regard, but in that regard where they use the Latinxes for Black lives, it erases the Afro-Latinxes who are Black Latinxes. Additionally, participants also stated there was a lack of media representation, was when I asked them about where they had seen anti-Blackness. So they mentioned, one participant said, hello, Telemundo, you mean? You know what I mean? Any telenovela. We're lucky if if I was an actress over there, I'd probably be like a maid. And nothing wrong with being a housekeeper. But just because my skin is brown and I don't have a pointy nose and I don't straighten my hair, it's like they want to exist. They want to pretend we don't exist. And I don't like that. When you watch any Latin station, it's all just beige. And so when I hear the hurt, that really is present in this this lack of media representation, erases Afro-Latinxes from a salient part of their worldview. Whereas we see Afro-Latinxes are able to then use social media for these to rewrite themselves back into narratives that really shouldn't have erased them in the first place. With Latinidad, there's all these notions of mestizaje and a a mixed race utopia where everyone has the same, but we know that that's not true. We know that the Black and Afro Costa Ricans, Afro Latin Americans in general, as well as Afro Latinx and here in the US, have worse off outcomes, less access to resources. And so this idea that Latinidad can just be one thing really gives us this monolith that doesn't really represent Afro Latinxes in a full way. And leaves us out of our social movements when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, even. We've had, Caribbean immigrants, Afro Latinxes, they have to put aside their ethnic identity to just be Black. And it should be a way that we can create more inclusive movements that everyone still feels seen and heard within the Black diaspora.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that story with us, because it just kind of gives me a sense of awareness, a sense of, I'm at loss of words, and I'm going to let it be for it, but I'm definitely going to come back to that thought. But definitely thanks for sharing that, because I had so many thoughts as you mentioned that. I'm going to go to Dr. Wisdom. I'm going to come back to you, and then we're going to begin to wrap up this segment when we be thinking about your call to action, Dr. Cooks Allen, the call to action of what you feel this audience can do, or the world who are listening to the replay can do, to better support the Afro Latinx community and their voice and their inclusion in these initiatives. If you think about that, Dr. Williams, who call to action, tell us this. Is there a difference, and I guess there could be, between the younger Black women and the older Black women and the future of what happens next with trusting Black women? What's your advice or observation on how younger women can get involved in this trusting Black women movement?
I think we have, when we're talking about young people, we have to understand their culture and how they engage. And so a lot of social media, sharing of memes as a form of communication too. And so sometimes they don't have the language. How do we make space for them to be in this movement work as well? Oftentimes we'll create advisory boards and we'll invite them to the table, but we don't let them have a voice. And so if we really want to see change, I love young people. I really feel like they are going to be the shift when it comes to the world really changing. They don't put up with no mess. And I love that about them. But I also think that it can be a mentorship that we can do as well. So we can learn from them and they can learn from us. We're not passing down the wisdom and knowledge to really help them understand the history of social movements, change, strategies that you can implement as well, but then also allow them to teach us of some strategies that they have identified as well. And then like let's meet in the middle as well, but we have to invite them to the table. I don't think that there will be a difference in what it looks like depending on what your age is that we just have to do a better job of inviting each other to the table.
Thank you. Thank you. I love it. I love it. And I like how you describe inviting the young people. I was talking to a young lady once recently, and she was telling me how she was struggling in relationship with older Black women. And she came to me, and I can tell she was just a really cool kid, just that person, what you see, what you get. She didn't have the glitz, the glamour, the divitude, or whatever people call, but you can tell she's a sincere person. And as she's talked, she began to tell me how the older women were not being so nice to her. And she began to ask me, what am I doing? What's going on? Whatever. And I just sit there and I didn't know what to say. But as she began to talk, she's like, well, I got a bunch of homeboys and I get along really well with guys, but I don't understand what's happening with the older Black women, right? So I began to talk to a homegirl of mine, and she began to explain to me some of these dynamics. So I love how you begin to open the door and make room for younger Black women, because everything you have said opens the door for that Black woman who let me know the struggle is real when it comes to her just being herself, trying to connect with the older generation, but definitely not doing so well. We got a little time. We're going to come back to you, Dr. Wisdom, for some Q&A. And JB, think about a question you have for each panelist, and then we're going to go to segment 2 right there at 8:55. So we got about 8 minutes, 7, 8 minutes. Dr. Williams, let's talk about your call to action. I mean, not Dr. Williams, Dr. Cooks Allen. Let's talk about your call to action. What's next? Can you tell us, what do you think, the future of online discourse looks like? Social media, is it helpful? Is it going to change? Is it going to help the message, hurt the message? What is your call to action for the message that you want us to get out so that we can better understand, support the Afro Latinx community, their voice, and their activities in social media?
So I think we'll probably continue to see marginalized groups adapting and being able to use social media to reclaim their narratives and build coalition across borders. I think the world is getting smaller the more that internet expands. And we also need to keep in mind that with the rise of algorithmic biases and also increasing content moderation by these platforms, you have to, there's a risk that these voices will be further marginalized. And so it's important that we advocate for equitable access to these platforms to ensure that the marginalized voices in these communities aren't silenced in the process. So my call to action is to listen to our stories, to let us have a space to speak. Don't discredit social media activism when we know that it's a more accessible form of activism for a lot of people. I'd encourage listeners to start by following Afro-Latinx activists, engaging with their content, and be an active participant in amplifying their voices, sharing their work, and supporting their causes. I think it's important that we make sure that when we think about our movements, when we think about movements like Black Lives Matter, we're including all Black people and letting them feel seen and heard in all of our spaces.
Awesome, awesome. If you don't mind, if you can share in the chat, some hashtags or some uh, different communities or, creatives that we can follow so we can get started and then we can begin to tune our algorithm. People tell me I got a stink feed, so I need to improve my feed, with some new content. So I need to work on mine. I don't know about yours. But, we got time for probably one or two questions. Jay, can you help me? I know there's been some active chat. Can you help me, fill just one or two questions and read what's been put in chat? Maybe one for Dr. Williams and one for Cooks Allen.
Okay, so one for Dr. Ashley Crooks Allen. Have you had any raw conversations? Because this whole, we carry the same skin tone, we carry the same face, we carry different experiences, and then being able to be heard. Have you been able to have the conversations with, say, Afro-Latinx community with an African American, where everybody's able to voice all these different thoughts and feelings? Have you sat in the room with any of those moments or cultivated those yet?
Usually my interviews are one-on-one interviews, so I haven't been able to do that yet, though I'm looking into branching into story circles, which will allow more of a group setting for short story sharing. But what I've found in my research on Afro-Caribbeans as well as Afro-Latinx social media users is that with the Black Lives Matter movement, the distance that we saw between Black ethnic groups in the past has largely been closing with the introduction of the Black Lives Matter movement. So we saw that there was a lot of this kind of disconnect between Black ethnic groups from elsewhere and African Americans. But a lot of that was happening because people didn't really understand U.S. racism, right? And so people were seeing African Americans being treated poorly as they are because racism, and they were ascribing it to culture as though it must be something that they're doing, and so we shouldn't associate with them because then they'll treat us like them. But with the Black Lives Matter movement, there's been a lot more awareness of U.S. racism. So people are actually understanding that the police brutality, the state-sanctioned violence isn't of us, it's anti-Blackness that's pervasive globally. And so people are actually able to find more solidarity within the Black community in that way. People see themselves as Black, not only because they feel like they have to in order to survive, because they know that white people are perceiving them as Black, but they also see themselves as Black in the joint struggle and participants of this movement. When they hear Black Lives Matter, they know it means them too.
You know what? That's exciting. I'm looking forward to what comes out of your story circles, because these conversations show up in my family. So I'm loving all of this. And when you were talking, I'm remembering a lot of loaded moments that have showed up as we stood on opposite sides. And when you're talking, it's just a beautiful reminder that we're on the same side and we get to be unique and different. Thank you. And the book cover looks amazing. And I'm not going to talk about the poetry because we got to get to Dr. Williams, but the book cover looks amazing. I have this question for you, Dr. Williams, because the Sister Song, which needs to be said, sistersong.net, we need to go to the site and see, because the visual storytelling just pulls us into what you're doing. But I am very curious, when you have these conversations, are you always waking up the room? Are you ever in a space where people are already flowing with you? I kind of feel like you're teaching everybody to swim in this area. What's the truth?
Honestly, within the reproductive justice movement, they're waking me up. And so I've been in this movement work with RJ for about the past 3 years. When I say the social justice movements operating in silos, I would wonder how powerful we could see things if it was racial injustice, if it was also healing justice, housing justice, birth justice, which is the many things that reproductive justice holds. So those intersections is the work that we do. And we get to see joy, actual pleasure in this space as well. And so I just want to encourage you all, please tap into Sister Song, follow them on Instagram too, because you can learn a lot in regards to what they've been working on for the past almost 30 years.
Wow. Beautiful.
Awesome, awesome. What a great segment. I tried something new tonight, and I just want to let y'all know, first of all, I'm an artist. Well, I'm an artist, I'm a creator, and I'm sensitive about my creation. I mimic the great creator. What an awesome segment. Sometimes when I put things together, I love me some gumbo, right? So when I begin to think about these speakers, I'm like, what happens when we begin to mix that ingredients? And I like what was just said. What if these various movements begin to work in collaboration and begin to see the big picture? I like with Dr. Cooks Allen when she says, we know how the people, the majority, gonna see us. One identity, we kind of don't even care, but we know how the majority is gonna see us. So that forces us to make a certain decision or a choice. But anyway, I got speeches. I never get speeches, Jay. Did you see me? Freeze for a second. I mean, it was not the Zoom. It was not the glitch, right? I was like, I am speechless, right? Thank you, Dr. Cooks Allen. Thank you, Dr. Williams. So make sure you guys follow them in the chat. If you got some questions for them, message them directly. If you want to reach out with them, if you want to collaborate with them, I would love to see Dr. Cooks Allen in some of these